Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for another episode of our Academic Partner Spotlight series. Today, we're joined by Professor Olayinka David West, who is the Associate Dean and Professor of Information Systems at Lagos Business School. She's also the program lead of the Sustainable and Inclusive Digital Financial Services Initiative. Professor David West, thank you so much for joining us today, and please go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself and your research.
Thank you so much, Sylvie. It's nice to be here, and it's great to be a member of the Academic Partners Network. Well, my name is Olayinka David West, and I work at the Lagos Business School, and I've been doing that for about 20 years now. Academically, I have a bachelor's degree in computer science and a master's degree in business systems analysis and design, and also a doctorate in business administration that focused on looking at quality in electronic banking services. I think going into teaching was really a segue from my core in technology, because my focus was really about how do we enable digitally transformed businesses and society. And I've been doing that for over the last 20 years at the business school. And also prior to the business school, I worked in financial services as well as technology, where I played several roles. So you can see that the intersection between financial services and technology, as we see, has actually been one of my passions for a long time. And so it's just all coming to fruition as we go into this fintech space and this new digitally enabled financial services era. Thanks.
Great, thank you so much for that introduction. Now, as you mentioned, much of your work focuses on financial inclusion and fintech and the digital space. So for a bit of context, could you tell us a little bit about what the biggest barriers and challenges to financial inclusion are, both in Nigeria and the West African region?
Great, thank you. And I think in answering this question, there isn't one magic bullet answer, because financial inclusion varies and it's very contextual depending on several factors within the environment. But when we talk about financial inclusion, generally, we're looking at 4 key dimensions. We're looking at access to financial services. We're looking at the usage of financial services, the quality of affordability of those financial services, but also the fact is that it's not just about having an account as a store of value, but it's also how are these financial services changing lives? So what's the impact around financial services in general? And because the dimensions are so many, financial services are also cut across savings, credit, having a transaction account, investments, pensions, insurance. So there isn't one barrier or one way. So when we look at barriers and they vary by gender, by geography. Are you in a rural area or in an urban area? By age, or even the financial product type. So in Nigeria, we really try and focus on what are the barriers by segment. So on the demand side, we've observed that access is one of the critical barriers, and that also means access to financial services agents, physical financial services agents, but then again, and proximity of those financial services agents, especially in rural locations, in areas like the creeks that are more inaccessible, or again, not economically viable for bank branches to be located there. On the usage side, we also look at affordability, and affordability is in 3 dimensions, because right now, one of the biggest initiatives that has driven financial inclusion globally is mobile money and digital financial services. But then again, not everyone has access to digital devices in terms of affordability. There's also bank fees and charges regarding transactions and engaging in transactions. And then there's also network fees and charges, depending on if you have to have access to data or if you have to use other means of paying for accessing the network. So those are the different charges that we look at. And then we shouldn't also forget that financial education and digital literacy are also critical, especially when we're talking about digital financial services. On the supply side, again, this has been an area that's been dominantly owned by incumbent or legacy financial service providers. But we also need to think about cost to serve, because when you're trying to take financial services down market to the last mile, to the poorer poorer segments of the economy, you also have to ask yourself, is it affordable? Can they afford it? And then another thing we also focus on is product innovation. Are the products fit for purpose or fit for the markets that we're trying to serve? On the regulatory side, while a lot of regulators have actually been very proactive in moving regulations forward. Some of the key regulations that we see that enable or limit are really about identity and know your customer. And so one of the things regulators have introduced is what they call tiered accounts. And those tiered accounts vary by the different types of know your customer validation that can be done. Then there's also the issue around distribution channels. So a lot of regulators have also introduced agent banking frameworks where you can use third-party independents as agents, especially in those rural locations that you don't want to necessarily put down the branch infrastructure. Then the third is licensing of non-bank financial institutions. And if you notice, in some countries where financial inclusion has thrived or done well, it's been through DFS providers like mobile money operators that are operated by the telco sector. So those are the key barriers, and they vary by country, by segment, by product, and things like that. But they would always narrow down and converge around those key issues. Thank you.
Yes, definitely. And it sounds like financial inclusion is an incredibly complex and multidimensional concept. And so when you're working in financial inclusion, there's a lot of different bases to cover, whether it be, affordability, the design of the financial services, infrastructure, things like that. So at the Sustainable and Inclusive Digital Financial Services Initiative, you do a lot of work around these areas. Can you tell me a little bit about some of the work and research going on at SIDFS?
Okay, we have a treasure trove of research, and that was one of the premises of even founding SIDFS. How can we create an evidence base to actually mobilize and stimulate financial inclusion, especially on the supply side? Now, being in a business school, we're quite mindful of our own capabilities, and because we're a business school as well, close to industry, we have the convening power. So in terms of research, what we've been able to do was, first of all, look at research on the supply side, things about what types of business models can drive financial inclusion. Because when you look at a traditional legacy and financial institution, the business model they operate in cannot be the same to go to the different market segments that they're not used to. We also looked at product innovation and also collaboration practices, because another thing is that you can't, the whole value chain is actually quite diverse. How do we ensure that there's collaborative practices to ensure that we can actually get to every Nigerian or every citizen on the planet? Some of the research that we also looked at was policy-related issues. And don't forget that because financial inclusion is multidimensional, it's not just in the financial services ecosystem. For example, the foundational principles around identity, access to identity, security, cybercrime, they're outside the financial services landscape, but then they all impact how we look at financial inclusion and how financial services are accepted. So we looked at market enabling policies as well. Another, so we also, the thesis is that financial inclusion is not a financial sector imperative, especially in a developing economy. It is a national imperative. So across different macro indicators, we looked at liquidity, access to credit. How does financial inclusion enable and drive national development? Alongside as well, we also, while we don't do primary genders, demand side studies, we use existing national data sets like the Access to Finance and World Bank's Global Findex. And what we try and do is disaggregate the profiles, presenting household views, community views, and individual views. So people can begin to, almost like a Rubik's Cube, what does this look like? What do widows look like? Just to better understand and to better present that information to enable decision-making within the financial services ecosystem.
Great. Thank you so much for that overview. And just looking at your website before, it was fascinating to see all of the different kinds of work that are going on, whether it be on the innovation side, the design side, the policy side. That's incredibly important when you're looking at such a multidimensional concept. So thank you for sharing that with us. Now, my last question is a little bit more general and more forward-looking. So as we know, the fintech space, like many other areas of technology, it's evolving very fast. Looking forward, what innovations and developments do you think we'll see in fintech in the next few years, and what challenges might these present?
Okay, this is an interesting one because I think Nigeria is renowned for having the largest number of fintech unicorns. in terms of venture capital funding as well. It's renowned for attracting the most venture capital funding. But in the financial inclusion space, it's actually quite a travesty that a lot of these fintechs are not inclusive, right? They're not targeting the bottom of the pyramid market. Again, the challenges there and the barriers there are obvious, but again, they're basically providing alternative solutions to existing banked customers. So when we look at what does the future hold, in December 2022, the central bank, alongside with the rest of the financial ecosystem, launched Nigeria's first national fintech strategy. And the whole idea of that strategy was really to galvanize how do we use fintech to drive inclusion and build an inclusive ecosystem. So some of the issues in that strategy is about building a fintech ecosystem that addresses both the market, in other words, the players, as well as the governance, the rules, and the development of those are neck and neck. And the strategy focuses on how do we ensure that we build foundational and sustainable and resilient rails in terms of the infrastructure, as well as market practices and as well as talent. So by the time we put all this together, now having a national strategy is the first step. The next stage is, okay, how do we now basically get the buy-in of the stakeholders as well and begin to see the implementation of this strategy? And I think where we're at now is that strategy has been developed, it's been launched. So it's now, how do we start to roll it out and implement it to ensure that we can derive the benefits of the fintech sector? We can ensure that the growth is actually feeding back into our own economic growth as well, and to ensure that basically every Nigerian has access. And so by the time, if we can do that and ensure that no one is left behind, and don't forget that the fintech sector also provides the payment rails. And if we have efficient payment rails, then you can think about commerce, and then the whole commerce in terms of trade corridors, both national as well as within Africa, can also be enabled and enhanced. So I think that the future in terms of the fintech ecosystem is bright, but it's now about how do we use it strategically, deliberately, beyond payments, and then looking at different types of payments, micro payments, larger payments, etc., and then cross-border transactions as well.
Great, thank you. That was very interesting to hear your perspective on that, because obviously I do not work in fintech, but it's a very interesting and rich area that I think there's going to be a lot going on there in the next few years. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
Okay, that is actually all the questions I have for you today. Professor David West, thank you so much for joining us today. It was a pleasure to speak with you and learn a little bit about more about your research, as well as the SIDFS initiative. So thank you so much.
In the next phase of the work we're doing, we're focusing on product innovation. So we're going hands-on into getting financial service providers to really think around building appropriate fit-for-purpose products for the markets that they're trying to serve. So that's quite exciting, and we look forward to that.
Yes, definitely. And perhaps we'll have to have another interview about that.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak and engage with the community, and we look forward to engaging more on the innovation side.